Chapter 42 of Colonel Quaritch, V.C. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Colonel Quaritch, V.C. by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 42. Ida goes to meet her fate. Most people of a certain age and a certain degree of sensitiveness of disposition, in looking back down the vista of their lives, whereon memory's melancholy light plays in fitful flashes like the alternate glow of a censer swung in the twilight of a tomb, can recall some one night of peculiar mental agony. It may have come when first we found ourselves face to face with the chill and hopeless horror of departed life, when, in our soul's despair, we stretched out vain hands and wept, called, and no answer came, when we kissed those beloved lips and sank aghast at the contact with their clay, those lips more eloquent now in the rich pomp of their unutterable silence than in the brightest hour of their unsealing. It may have come when our honour and hope of all our days lay at our feet shattered like a shred on the hard roadway of the world. It may have come when she, the sweet star of our youth, the pure and holy thing, the type of completed beauty and woman's most perfect measure, she to whom was given the chalice of our joy, and who held in her white hand the love-begotten germ of all our power, ruthlessly emptied and crushed it, and as she became a star, slid down our horizon's way to rise upon some other sky. Or it may have come when Brutus stabbed us, or when a child whom we had cherished struck us with a serpent fang of treachery and left the icy poison to creep upon our heart. One way or another it has been with most of us, that long night of utter woe, and all will own that it is a ghastly thing to face. And so Ida de la Molle had found it. The shriek of the great gale rushing on that Christmas Eve round the stout Norman towers was not more strong than the breath of despair that shook her life. She could not sleep. Who could sleep on such a night, the herald of such a morrow? The wail and roar of the wind, the crash of falling trees, and the rattle of flying stones seemed to form a fit accompaniment to the turmoil of her mind. She rose, and putting on her dressing gown, went to the window, and in the dim light watched the trees gigantically tossing in a great struggle for their life. An oak and a birch were within her view. The oak stood the gale out for a while. Presently there came an awful gust and beat upon it. It would not bend, and the tough roots would not give. So beneath the weight of the breath of its destiny, the big tree broke in two like a straw, and its spreading top was whirled into the moat. But the birch gave and bent. It bent till its delicate filaments lay upon the wind like a woman's streaming hair, and the fierceness of the gust wore itself away and spared it. "See what happens to those who stand up and defy their fate," said Ida to herself with a bitter laugh. "That birch has had the best of it." Ida rose and closed the shutters. The sight of the storm affected her already strained nerves almost beyond bearing. She began to walk up and down the big room, flitting like a ghost from end to end and back again and again back. What could she do? What should she do? Her fate was upon her. She could no longer resist the inevitable. She must marry him. And yet her whole soul revolted from the act with an overwhelming fierceness which astonished even herself. She had known two girls who had married people whom they did not like, being at the time or pretending to be attached to somebody else, and she had observed that they accommodated themselves to their fate with considerable ease. But it was not so with her. She was fashioned of another clay, and it made her faint to think of what was before her. And yet the prospect was one on which she could expect little sympathy. Her own father, although personally he disliked the man whom she must marry, was clearly filled with amazement that she should prefer Colonel Quaritch, middle-aged, poor and plain, to Edward Cossey, handsome, young and rich as Croesus. He could not comprehend or measure the extraordinary gulf which her passion had dug between the two. If therefore This was so with her own father. How would it be with the rest of the world? She paced her bedroom till she was tired, and then, in access of despair, which was sufficiently distressing in a person of her reserved and stately manner, flung herself, weeping and sobbing, upon her knees, and, resting her aching head upon the bed, prayed as she had never prayed before that this cup might pass from her. She did not know, how should she, that at that very moment her prayer was being answered, and that her lover was then, even as she prayed, lifting the broken stone and revealing the hoard of ruddy gold. But so it was. She prayed in despair and agony of mind, and the prayer carried on the wild wings of the night brought a fulfilment with it. Not in vain were her tears and supplications, for even now the Deliverer delved among the dust and awful treasures of the dead. And even now the light of her coming happiness was breaking on her tortured night, as the first cold gleams of the Christmas morning were breaking over the stormy fury of the void without. And then, chilled and numbed in body and mind, she crept into her bed again, and at last lost herself in sleep. By 9:30, when Ida came down to breakfast, the gale had utterly vanished, though its footprints were visible enough in shattered trees, unthatched stacks, and ivy torn in knotty sheets from the old walls it clothed. It would have been difficult to recognise in the cold and stately lady who stood at the dining-room window, noting the havoc and awaiting her father to come in, the lovely, passionate, dishevelled woman who some few hours before had thrown herself upon her knees praying to God for the succour she could not win from man. Women, like nature, have many moods and many countenances to express them. The hot fit had passed, and the cold fit was on her now. Her face, except for the dark hollows round the eyes, was white as winter, and her heart was cold as winter's ice. Presently her father came in. "What a gale!" he said. "What a gale! Upon my word, I began to think that the old place was coming down about our ears. And the wreck among the trees is dreadful. I don't think there can have been such a wind since the time of King Charles I, when the top of the tower was blown clean off the church. You remember, I was showing you the entry about it in the registers the other day, the one signed by the parson and old Sir James de la Molle. The boy who has just come up tells me that he hears that poor old Mrs. Massey's summer house on the top of Dead Man's Mount has been blown away, which is a good riddance for Colonel Quaritch. Why, what's the matter with you? How pale you look!" "The gale kept me awake. I got very little sleep," answered Ida. "And no wonder. Well, my dear, you haven't wished me a Merry Christmas yet. Goodness knows we want one badly enough. There has not been much merriment at Honham of late years." "A Merry Christmas to you, father," she said. "Thank you, my love, the same to you. You have got most of your Christmases before you, which is more than I have. God bless me, it only seems like yesterday since the big bunch of holly tied to the hook in the ceiling there fell down on the breakfast table and smashed all the cups, and yet it is more than 60 years ago. Dear me, how angry my poor dear mother was. She never could bear the crockery to be broken. It was a little failing of your grandmother's." And he laughed more heartily than Ida had heard him do for some weeks. She made no answer, but busied herself about the tea. Presently, glancing up, she saw her father's face change. The worn expression came back upon it again, and he lost his buoyant bearing. Evidently a new thought had struck him, and she was in no great doubt as to what it was. "We had better get on with breakfast," he said. "You know that Cossey is coming up at 10 o'clock." "10 o'clock?" she said faintly. "Yes, I told him 10 so that we could go to church afterwards if we wished to. Of course, Ida, I am still in the dark as to what you have made up your mind to do, but whatever it is, I thought that he had better once and for all hear your final decision from your own lips. If, however, you feel yourself at liberty to tell it to me as your father, I shall be glad to hear it." She lifted her head and looked him full in the face, and then paused. He had a cup of tea in his hand, and it was held in the air halfway to his mouth, while his whole face showed the overmastering anxiety with which he was awaiting her reply.